And our next Rotary tradition is we recite the four-way test. And the four-way test is of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And that is the Rotary four-way test. We are a service organization. We don't just meet and greet, and we're actually meeting and greeting online in this particular case, but in a brick and mortar club, it's not about necessarily just meeting and greeting, but it's giving back to the communities and where which we live through service to the residents of those communities and the causes that are in those communities where we can be a benefit. Today we have a great speaker with us, Dr. Robert Twilley. He is the director of the Louisiana Sea Grant program. He's the executive director and he's a professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Science at LSU. Presently, Dr. Twilley serves as the president of Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation. He's been a distinguished professor both at LSU and UL Lafayette. He is the founder of the Louisiana Coastal Sustainability Studio and developed the University of Lafayette Center for Ecology and Environmental Technology. Most of Dr. Twilley's research has been focused on coastal systems, ecology both in the Gulf of Mexico, throughout Latin America, and the Pacific Islands. Dr. Twilley has published extensively on mangrove ecology, global climate change, and has been involved in developing coastal ecosystem models coupled with engineering designs to forecast the rehabilitation of coastal and wetland ecosystems. He received his BS and MS from East Carolina University and his PhD from the University of Florida. And postdoctoral studies were at Horn Point Laboratory at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Studies. And with that, Dr. Twilley, I'm going to allow you to begin your presentation about our coastal zone area.
Great. So I'll first do a quick test. I assume you can hear me okay, and I'm going to. So really, I really appreciate the invite. I'm going to talk about our delta here in coastal Louisiana. I'm going to first sort of do a little bit of self-promotion and give you a little bit of background on our see if I can our Sea Grant program. I am director of the Louisiana Sea Grant College program. It's probably pretty interesting that the timing here because we just got the president's budget was released this morning, and we heard that the Sea Grant program was being proposed to be zeroed out in the FY 2018 budget. So I'm going to take a little opportunity of explaining why we think Sea Grant is important. So I'll for those that are on the line, we're one of 33 programs across the nation. The Sea Grant program model is very much like the land grant model at universities, except we focus on the coast. So most of us are situated on university campuses. Our job is to get the research content from those campuses and out into the communities. It is an extension model. In Louisiana, we have 9 offices across the state, as you can see in this slide. And these offices have a Sea Grant agent. They live in the coastal communities, and we're housed at LSU. We work with other universities across the state, and our job is to get that information off the campuses and down into coastal communities. And it's not just fisheries. We work with resilient communities and economies and healthy coastal ecosystems, and we also do a lot of education workforce development. Here at Louisiana, we've had about 1,500 graduate students in our 45-year history. I like to use this Mark Twain quote, all schools and all colleges have 2 great functions: to confer and to conceal valuable knowledge. And so that's the pride we take at Sea Grant, is connecting our university content to serve coastal communities. So it is service that we take pride in, and again, getting it from the ivory tower down into our community base. And for Louisiana, this has been a real important tradition or a very important mission of service following Hurricanes Katrina and Rita during 2005 and the other hurricanes that we've had, as well as the oil spill, and interpreting what all this information overload during these crises, what it really means to community leaders, has been something that we've taken a lot of pride in. And all of us have these sort of outcomes that we are very much evaluation and performance driven, and that has a very strong economic development impact, as well as environmental literacy and training. So anyway, so that's our Sea Grant story, and but I want to follow up with that, and we are the only Sea Grant program that lives in a delta. And so the story today is focused on Deltaic coast, and there are very unique problems. If you're in Florida or in Everglades or in the Chesapeake Bay or up in New England, those are very different systems than what we are working in here. But we have a network of deltas around the world. So what we do here has very much impact on global issues, because deltas are the navigation entry to most continents. It's where you find large agriculture and fisheries and in many cases oil and gas production. So these systems are very important globally, and they all have some very common risk. In this slide, in Louisiana, of course, here at LSU, we like talking football. So we one of the issues we have, and this is an issue of deltas around the world, is land loss, is the actual conversion of the wetlands that make up deltas, the conversion of those wetlands into water. And what you see in this picture in red is the anticipation of what will be additional square miles of land that will be lost in the next 50 years. We lose a football field of wetlands every hour. And I want to explain that process, and then I want to tell a story about a vision of and what we're doing here in Louisiana to fix this problem. You will note, because I'm going to come back to this later, and in fact, if I get my little pen here working, you'll notice this little green spot right here, and that's going to be a big part of our discussion today, because we are doing something right in one spot in this coast, and that's really important. This is the draft of projections of future land loss out of the 2017 Coastal Master Plan, and this is future without action and under low, medium, and high conditions of sea level rise and subsidence. So it is a very daunting vision for Louisiana. And again, I want to emphasize this is very similar in a lot of deltas around the world, that we're not able to sustain the landscape that is, again, I want to emphasize, that's tremendous economic value to the United States, which I'm going to show you in a second, but to other countries around the world. Now, I want to tell this story in three lenses. The first is the ecological, and then I've got two other lenses that I want to explain. And so let's talk about how the system works, because if you've got a problem and you want to fix the problem, you've got to start with the fundamentals of how it works, whether it's an automobile or a delta. This is the fundamental approach. And I know this is, probably the phones will start dropping off, but, I had to show this little equation and set the tone right off the top here as to, how these systems work. And really what all this is saying here at the top of this slide is this right here, is that the sediment supply and what distinguishes deltas from all other coastal landscapes is this tremendous amount of sediment that normally or has historically built that land. And so This tabletop, we call it, or delta top right here, this is all built. I mean, all this is from land that was built from sediment that was delivered from upstream. And you can see it. There's a sediment plume there coming out of the mouth of the river past New Orleans. You can see the sediment plume here. You can see that river sediment versus this blue ocean Gulf of Mexico water. That light tan is a sediment that's delivered, that builds the land upon which the wetlands have been growing for the last 8,000 years. And in this little cartoon, again, with an emphasis on get my little pen here again, this emphasis on sediment supply. And that sediment supply, in order to build this land, this delta top, that sediment supply has to compensate for sea level rise, and it has to compensate for subsidence. Look, this is no different than your checking account. Or calculating your wealth. It's not how much money you put in that wallet. You got to compare that to how much you're taking out and spending. And so it's not just the sediment supply that maintains the land that we live and work on here in Louisiana, but each day the sea level rise gets a little higher, and each day the land is sinking lower. And so those elevations of which the water is rising and the land is sinking have to be compensated by the elevation provided by the sediment. It is the same process. The net land that we have is the input of elevation we get from the sediment and the loss of elevation that we get because the water is rising and the land is sinking. When I say elevation, let me be really clear here. We're talking about wetlands and the conversion of wetlands to water. That's the red that I showed you. And that is an elevation game. It's the net elevation that controls that. If you're losing elevation and the water is getting higher, those wetlands will drown, and that causes the wetlands to convert to open water. If the sediment supply maintains that landscape and builds elevation, then those wetlands can maintain themselves. And so that's why we're going to talk a lot, and we talk a lot about sediment supply, subsidence, and sea level rise, because it's the combination of the three that ends up building this green that you see. And just to emphasize that, I put Iowa and Ohio and Illinois and Missouri, because this green that's where the sediment comes from. That green, Louisiana can owe itself to the sediment that rolls off the landscapes in these states, comes down the river during floods, and is deposited and builds our land. So we are connected, to 41% of the lower 48 states. We rely on that watershed to bring it as a source of sediments that is delivered to build Louisiana and build our delta. And as you can see, that sediment supply over time has been decreasing. So that's one of the problems that we're dealing with is we're getting less sediment supply. That hasn't been very good timing, because we're doing that when in fact there is projections. This is the sea level over the last 100, 200 years, and different projections of what sea level rise we may see in the future. And remember, the net balance of land, the net balance of wetland as far as elevation relative to water is a combination of what elevation we gain by having sediment supply delivered versus the elevation we lose by having subsidence and sea level rise relative to water levels. And so when you're losing sediment, as I've shown you on the left, at a time when sea level rises are occurring, then that is a real concern for us as to what this real estate's going to look like in the future. And that's the focus of our challenge of how to sustain our delta. the reason I show this flood or this slide is I want to emphasize the importance of floods. Floods, these little blue outlines here in the upper left panel these are the places where during high river events, during flood events, historically, not today, but historically, the river would break through the natural levees of the river, and there's a French term called crevasses, and so that breaking of the levee and that water would flow through those levees and flood into the wetlands. That's the way that sediment was delivered to compensate for that elevation gain or build elevation gain to compensate for subsidence and sea level rise. And so that's flooding is of the river is what built this delta. That's really important because my next part of this talk is about that flooding. And this map, Fisk map, which is beautiful, 1947 map by Fisk. You can see that the large river breaks up in these smaller and smaller streams, and so you can see this network of streams where the river would actually flow out into the wetlands, and again during high flood events break through the natural levees and disperse this sediment and build these wetlands and build this elevation to allow them to keep their head above water. Basically, that's exactly what this is all about. Because if you don't have the sediment doing that, basically what's happening in Louisiana is these wetlands are drowning. And that's why we're seeing wetlands convert to open water. And that flooding brings us up to this second lens, and that's human settlement. And we occupy deltas around the world because they are the economic engines of nearly every continent that you find deltas, and the United States is no different. The reason for the purchase of this land, as we know, was related to its economic benefit and having the river as a highway into the inner parts of our continent. That vision was laid down early in our history here in the United States. And what's interesting is that if you're going to settle in a delta, where do you settle? Well, you settle on the high land. And where's the high land? The high land is right next to the river. And so, as you can see, this ARPANT system, this is the property that was awarded to as deeds to landowners, and they followed the river. So the ecology follows the river, as I just showed you, this ecological features on the left panel. Well, guess what? So does human settlement. And if you look at where New Orleans was settled and what strategies went into settling New Orleans, flood protection, finding the high ground, and 100 river miles inland from the Gulf of Mexico. At the time, they had huge forest occur between New Orleans. I got a little pop-up I was reading. Sorry for slowing down there. So anyway, human settlement has followed the river, and that has built conflict because, again, the river provides the sediment through floods to nourish the ecological landscape. Well, those same floods cause a lot of human suffering to human settlement, to people, and to industry. Agriculture being the first, trying to keep our agriculture interest and industry alive in the Delta was a real struggle because of flooding. So we've had to deal with this human settlement and the industries that developed, and those industries have been very significant. They've built this wealth of ecosystems. We are the second largest state in the United States as far as fisheries. Alaska is the largest. We are 30% of our oil and gas, and this percent actually may be a little outdated, of supply, of domestic supply of energy. And what you'll notice is the infrastructure that's sitting on these wetlands. We are the navigation, one of the largest top 10 ports in the world by tonnage. Again, the infrastructure that goes into building that is sitting on this wetland landscape, and people, the workforce that supports those industries, which have, again, such strong importance to our nation. And you can see historically, the adaptation of building was to deal with floods. But in fact, that's what causes the conflict, is this conflict, and we saw it in the 1927 flood, where the process of delivering sediment to build our wetlands is also a process of flooding that causes tremendous human suffering. And we had to resolve that back after this 1927 flood. And we resolved it, and was in this picture I always like to show is very significant, is John Curry in the lower panel to the left. Standing there in that photograph is Herbert Hoover, who actually was responsible for coming down and organizing the federal response. And that federal response was the Flood Control Act of 1928. On the left panel is the flooding area of the flood of 1927. And on the right panel in pink is the flood control system that was built by Congress as a public work project to protect industry, protect people, human settlement, but it built conflict because it restricted the river within this pink boundary, and it no longer could flood the wetlands. So you can see where we started moving toward this conflict after the 1927 flood, and that brings in this third lens, which is engineering and infrastructure. And it's a very interesting. This is the flood control project design for flood control. One key number is 1.25 million cubic feet per second flow. That's what's maintained, and if the river reaches that stage, then these other outlets are opened. And these different flood features. Here's one everyone, if you're in Louisiana, you know about. This is Bonnie Carey, one of the first one that's open. And so we do have these infrastructure to help control the floods. But this infrastructure has not helped build wetlands. It's provided flood control and public safety and promoted navigation, but it has not allowed the wetlands to grow. And you can see the significance. This is actually a high river stage. These trees actually, the trunk, you should be able to see the trunks of the trees. This is how close and how well through a levee system we're able to maintain our industry, maintain our economy, and through flood control. And so I want to show you real quick how fast this Gulf of Mexico has been moving in. And I'm going to show you real quickly a comparison in this region of Louisiana where we turned off the sediment flow down Bayou Lafourche, which is right here, but we kept it open in a place called the Old River Control Structure right here, and river and sediment still flows down the Atchafalaya. And you can see in this diagram to the right here where the Atchafalaya remains open, and sediment plume, and you can see it right here. There's a sediment plume. Use my pen real quick. There's a sediment plume that still exists because this structure allows 30% of the flow, combined flow of the Red River and the Mississippi River. 30% of that combined flow goes down the Atchafalaya. Here's the sediment plume, and that has maintained the connection between the river and wetlands. And this area has not. As I showed you, we cut that off in 1904, and we haven't had the flooding in this wetlands. And I'm going to show you a shoreline change in this coastal basin versus this coastal basin as a result of turning off the river. And I'm going to use this marsh to water ratio of 50%. We don't need to go into that. I think you'll see, just think of the lines I'm getting ready to show you are lines used to draw the shoreline of Louisiana historically. And again, in this area where the river is still connected, the delta is that green spot that I showed you is still growing. Now, this white line, the background image is a 2011 flood. The white line is the shoreline that existed in 1932. And you can see it all along here using this marsh to water ratio of 50%. But just think of this as a shoreline of wetlands in 1932. Now, remember, in the next slide I'm going to show you, we're going to compare what that shoreline looks like here, where we turn the sediment off, versus that shoreline here, where we've kept the sediment from the river connected to the wetlands. And that's the test to demonstrate the power of the river in controlling our landscape. And you can see here that, in fact, where the river was, and this is by Lafourche, this is where we turned off the river, no longer flows into this region as sediment supply. Look at the distance that that shoreline has moved. It's 17 kilometers, or about 35 miles, from 1932 to 2010. And compare that to where we have the river still exist and connected here in the Chapelite. It hasn't moved at all. And so when I equate the power of the river of building elevation and compensating for sea level rise and subsidence, and the power of that building that elevation is very evident from 1932 to 2010, where the river kept connected by the old river control structure, versus where that river no longer floods into our wetlands, and that it moves at 2 football fields inland. The Gulf of Mexico is migrating 2 football fields inland per year. And so this is, again, where the wetlands maintain themselves and the shoreline has been stable. And, of course, this is the red that's in Terrebonne Bay, where the Gulf of Mexico is moving and migrating farther inland each day. Now, this has become really evident lately in a small community called Ile-de-Jean-Charles, just south of Houma, east of Houma. And here's Highway 1 going down to Golden Meadows and out to Grand Isle. And this small community now is considered a community of climate refugees because they're having to move inland. They are migrating this community with funding from housing and urban development to migrate this entire community up to higher ground. Now, when you look at that migration, I just showed you the shoreline. This community in this red dot, the shoreline was in front of this community in 1932, and now the shoreline has passed over this community since 1932, and now is north of them, and thus their exposure and to flood risk and hurricanes, and the outcome being having to migrate. And so I want to build this public safety. We needed the river to control the river for public safety from river floods, but we've opened ourselves up as exposure to hurricane flooding by allowing this wetland loss to occur. And with sea level rise, there's real concerns in these coastal areas that don't have the river. So what do? Well, we need to build land. That's the strategy. The strategy is, in our restoration program, to build land. And how do you build land? Well, you need the river. And so the good news is we still have the river. The river is still there. We have sediment resources, or maybe not as much as we used to have, but it's still there. So how do we use those sediment resources to reduce our flood risk? Because we're looking at 7 to 23 billion annual damages in the future with coastal storms, with sea level rise, without having this protective fringe of wetlands around our communities. And so this image becomes, very significant. To your left is the Gulf of Mexico with its flood risk. The river as a resource to help provide sediment to maintain this landscape. And again, just remember the infrastructure that's built on this land. And so I'm going to go through this real quick. We built this concept called ecosystem design. I've spent too much time on the introduction. I just wanted you've seen some of these before. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. We got choices we have to make. We've got infrastructure that's at risk. We need to put options on the table for people to select as we work on public safety and community resilience and economic development in the future. So we've come up with this concept of ecosystem design, which is putting ecosystems to work. That's the concept. Ecosystems do work for us. They reduce flood risk. They remove nitrate in the water. They help with water quality. They clean the air. They do a lot of work for us. Let's put them around our communities and so they can do work for us. And we built this studio to do that, working with engineering and architecture and coastal science. And the concept is to convert this negative, the fact that we don't use a river, in red. We've lost our ecosystems that used to do work for us. And so how can we, but we've done a great job of keeping the river for working coast and protecting human settlement. Can you do all three? That's the question. And this is not just a question in Louisiana. This is for deltas around the world. How do we convert it to this green, where we put ecosystems back to work, but we do it without threatening the safety of human settlement? And we certainly, because of the economic interest of Louisiana to the nation, we cannot, interfere with navigation and the economic engine that all deltas around the world provide. So this is the dilemma, and it's tough. Stakeholders in each of these, whether they're fisheries, whether you're reducing risk, or whether you're maintaining your economic viability, it's tough. And so. But I'm going to show you in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to do this real quick because we've got this sort of geared up to be a quick little vision of where we think would be an approach. I want to set it up real quick by saying that this, it is focused a lot on diversions, putting openings in the levees so that they can provide the sediment. But you've got to be really careful because you've got fisheries. So how do you maintain your fisheries but provide sediment that can build land? Because building land is what we're trying to do, but that also, if we're not careful, can reduce salinity and lose a lot of our fishing interest. And estuaries and all the fisheries that we support, we're the second largest in the United States, is really important. And here at Sea Grant, it's one of our major missions is to protect and serve our fishing industry as a sustainable fisheries. And we think there are ways of doing it, and that is what we call the pulse. And that is you use the flood. Here's the river height stage. Let me go back. And when the river height is really high, that is when you pulse and the salinities drop at a time of the year that has least negative impact on fisheries. And then when the river stage starts to fall, you close off the diversions and you allow the salinity to increase at a time when it's so important for our fisheries and have the salinities that they need to actually produce. So we see it in Four League Bay, right here where the sediment still occurs, is a very productive fishery because it's pulsed. And we think that there are clues here in this landscape that we can use to provide designs for estuaries while we're also providing sediment for flood control. I won't go through this diagram, but the idea again is having multiple diversions, provide the sediment, but do it only when the river hits this high level of 800,000 cubic feet per second. And this brown is when you would have the rivers turned on, providing sediment, and below this line you would not. This is when the fisheries gets its time of the estuary, and above it is when the sediment gets time in the estuary. So it's a compromise, and that's sort of the idea of this design. I'm going to show you our results of changing course. We were very proud to participate in this as part of our studio. This is something that we provided, we hope gives some vision and helps support the master plan. This is not the master plan. I want to make sure I'm really clear there, but it's a vision that the master plan does embrace. And we hope some of our ideas get incorporated as we move forward with the master planning process. We call it the Giving Delta, and the story goes like this. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm about to wrap up here. The Giving Delta, it's urgent. We need to empower the river. It's very important. It's what got us where we are today. It's what's going to get us to where we need to go in the future. Build and sustain wetlands. This is a major mission and addresses the major problem that we're seeing along the coast. We're also strengthening living culture. So it's not just wetlands, it's also people. We have to keep focused on the people part of our solutions. It's also, we have to secure economic indispensability. We are the economic engine of the nation, and we have to maintain that. We do that by integrating investments. You're hearing a lot about infrastructure investments. I think coastal Louisiana is a prime place where you will get a return on your investment by building infrastructure that can then also achieve wetland restoration. And we've known some of these design features. We knew back in 1897 that if we don't protect, and even with subsidence and sediment delivery, the great benefit to the present 2 or 3 following generations far outweighs disadvantages to future generations. 1897, we knew if we turned the sediments off that we would have the Gulf of Mexico moving forward up to our communities. And we've seen that. Now the 4th generation has to fix it. So this is a generational plan. It's something that we think about. I actually put my own picture in here. I was my first grandchild, my son and my mom, still living up in North Carolina. So, I think these generations are personal to everybody I know on the phone, and we think how we're going to plan for the next 4 generations. So we have to have a vision, and it's a vision of where we go in the future so that we can still navigate oil and gas and do fisheries 4 generations from now. And it's really basically, it's taking flood control structures just like we did over in Morgan City and over in the western part of the river in the Chaffalay, where we used an old river control structure. It is a flood control structure, and with the operation of that, we built, is the only place we're building wetlands. Why don't we build all these new flood control structures that we're going to need, all that infrastructure integrated into building wetlands? Build this greenery around the major stem of the river. But at the same time, we need to consolidate the delta back, and the intracoastal waterway is really key to us, and Highway 90. So it's consolidating the delta up around that Highway 90 intracoastal waterway region, but also opening up outlets for diversions. And so moving the port is one thing we've suggested, has been on the books for some time up to Port Sulphur as part of that consolidation. But then strengthening Highway 90 and our transportation systems to serve from Lafayette over to New Orleans, this economic engine that is so vital to the nation. So that's where I'll stop. I'll be glad to take any questions, and hopefully that's been informative to give you some perspective here in Louisiana and actually some of the issues of deltas around the world. And I need to pass this back, I think.
Dr. Twilla, that was fantastic. We really appreciate the presentation. At this time, Charles will ask you if anyone's on mute, just to unmute the phones and allow individuals on the call with us to have an opportunity to ask Dr. Twilla some questions.
And actually, there are a couple of questions out there. Dr. Twilla, Dr. Cicchini was asking, when you're done, please tell us your thoughts on it says WH budget vis-a-vis NOAA, all things coastal, particularly Sea Grant. Gary, if you're on the call, you want to elaborate on that?
Sorry, I had you on mute. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Hey, Robert, how are you doing? Listen, I know you were on the Hill last week, I know, talking up Sea Grant, and, God bless you for doing that. Just kind of wondering, I tell people all the time that the White House budget is always a political document and not really a financial document. But there are a lot of things in it that are a little bit alarming to us on the coast. And so I just wondered if you could fill us in a little bit about what you were doing last week and what you think the forecast might be for Sea Grant and NOAA in general.
Yeah, it's a real good point. I learned a lot about the whole budget process, and this is the executive branch perspective on what the budget should be. Of course, the legislative branch actually constructs the budget and passes appropriations, and so it's really important to hear what they have to say. And our Louisiana delegation, from my visits, are very supportive, and particularly now more than ever because Sea Grant does provide a service to our coastal region, and our coastal region is in crisis. And so, this program, I think, has performed. We have a strong return on investment. This is not a time where we need to, we should see any cuts in what we're emphasis on our coastal programs. what's great about Sea Grant is I'm letting our constituents tell our story. You know, we've got very strong constituents in the fishing industry, in our coastal communities, and our education programs that we have, and the work that we do with ecosystem restoration or help support the restoration components. You know, I'm letting them speak for us, and they are also willing to carry that message up to Washington. I'm very positive. I think the key will be, what does the House bill for appropriation, what does the House budget look like?
Yeah. I think we all are waiting for that. I guess, you know, from someone who cares about the Louisiana coast, and I'm not trying to sound like an activist here. You know, I work for a nonpartisan 501c3, but is there some word that we need to be getting out to our constituents here? You know,
well, we actually have on our website, and I'll get, if I can circulate that. I don't know if I had it on my slide, my first slide. You just type in Louisiana Sea Grant, you'll find it at Google. We actually have constituent letters that you can, you know, example letters you can download, and if you have your voice as to what Sea Grant's done for you, or what you think the value of Sea Grant, and if you'll write that and send it to us, we're collecting those letters so that we can. I'll be back up in Washington May 6th through the 9th, and we'll either hand deliver them or send them to staffers by PDF or whatever. So, you know, we're trying to build that constituent letter writing because we want our constituents to tell our story. We feel very confident that they, you know, from all the different parts of the coast, that they want to participate, and we're opening up avenues for them to participate.
Great. Thanks, Robert.
Robert,
Very
this is
good.
Charles. Wait, Philip, I apologize. Just a couple of quick questions. Again, this is a hard question to answer, but do you think ultimately there are net winners and net losers? For example, the oyster beds are going to take a hit if salinity drops. But I mean, do you think a scenario is out there that we just simply say, you know, this is a net loss, there's nothing that we can do about it? In other words, you know, land ceases to exist if we don't, and I'm just using this as an illustration, you know, if we don't lose some oyster beds, for example.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a really fair, and it's a really good question. And, you know, without a doubt, when you have a crisis like this, you know, we're trying to push the Delta back to where it was in 1932. And we can't do that. I mean, that would be impossible for us to redo a previous map. You know, we don't have enough sediment, and it's just, we can't do it. We have to think of a vision of a new landscape that we're going to live in. And as we do that, there are winners and losers. But you can mitigate some of those losses, I feel, by, you know, it's not necessarily that, say, certain fisheries will disappear. They may be at different places. And we have to be really careful about that. And that, now, some people will feel that is losing. You know, I've got to go to a different location or a farther distance, or, you know, moving where our existing processing infrastructure is related to where our catch is located. And there may be things we have to mitigate to align, you know, under this new landscape, our fishery industry, but it's not going to disappear. I mean, look, the Delta built that fishery, and that fishery is not going to disappear. But yes, when I say losing, it's because there might be inconvenience in aligning under this new landscape where we fish might not be the exact same place we fish today, but it doesn't mean it disappears. And you know, and people are going to have to migrate. We're going to have to move certain places. We just can't keep those communities protected when, you know, in certain locations, you know, by the second or third generation from now. And that's, you know, we're not going to lose those communities. They're just, and then we have to align them and have them in a location where They are insurable, and people are safe. And so those communities are going to feel like they lost something, but they're still there. They're just aligning them in a different location. So, I think that's my perspective on winning and losing.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Gary. It leads me to believe that maybe one of our future talks ought to be maybe someone from CPRA or from Water Institute to talk about the whole issue of migration, because it's going to happen one way or the other. And Robert knows this because we were on the change of course competition together, and we had these really open-ended conversations about, if you just turn off the grid, all those people will leave, which totally negates, the cultural roots that we have there. But on the other hand, there's been some anthropological research that's come out recently that says, the sixth generation fisherman who's on social media and now has the opportunity to go to college and all those kinds of things says, you know what, I didn't really want to be a fisherman anyway. And so I think we need to take a greater societal look at what migration actually means. I'll add one other point here as far as oysters, and Robert and I have gone back and forth about this before. Oysters live in one PPT, Robert. So I don't see them going anywhere, and the pelagic species are just going to move. So, so as far as winners and losers goes, I don't see many in the fishery industry. And by the way, the shrimp fishery actually increased after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So, I'm not making a case here other than just to say the uncertainty is very, very large, and the migration is very, very slow, like generationally speaking. So I'm not sure we're making too much of this in some ways. And I would love for you to tell me I'm wrong, please.
Well, no, but I think we need programs to help build these alignments, and that's what people are looking for. And the CPR, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, and the planning that they have and the budgets that they have just don't cover a lot of these issues. They don't cover where we put our highways. They don't cover the alignments of how our fisheries infrastructure should be aligned, or our navigation infrastructure should be aligned, so that we have a continuity of these economic engines under this new landscape that we're going to be living in. And I think that's you're going to hear. I think that is going to be the conversation after this 2017 master plan, because that 2017 master plan and the maps and the analysis of showing what's at stake if we do nothing is so compelling that, but they can't pay for everything. So there's got to be a lot of investments from the navigation, from oil and gas, and from all these other sectors that come in and say, okay, let's all work to start aligning all this infrastructure so that it's more coherent. That is where we got to go.
I think you're absolutely right. The financing is going to have to come from places maybe other than state and federal government at some point.
Government cannot pay for this.
Oh, I know.
It can't. And there's so many industries that it's at stake. If they could see a plan in alignment where their investments are protected and that they have this 3-generational vision of where they're going to do business and how they're going to do business, I think that's very hard. It's easy to say, but I think that's the kind of leveraging that is to move us forward. And the analytical work to put that economic engine, as you well know, you all have been very much involved in this, is putting value and figuring out the financing that goes into something like that.
Well, and the question comes up to timing, and I don't mean to dominate the question and answer here. I'm sorry, but Robert, we heard this morning that the Corps of Engineers has now said Mid-Barataria diversion won't even get an environmental review until 2022. What does that mean?
Well, that's very disappointing, but I also think that's just a sign of where we need to be working with our federal partners all along the way. That's a very sequenced kind of thinking to solve this problem. Okay, now that you've got your plan, now we're going to do the permit instead of things being parallel, and so that's extremely disappointing. 5 years. I mean, look at the rates I showed. They're not going to maintain at that rate, but
Yeah.
but look at what 5 years means to some of these communities.
No, you're right. Some of them won't be there in 5 years. No.
So there's a lot that needs to be done.
Well, very good. Again, great question and answer. Great presentation, Dr. Twilley. I will say that next week's presenter, Van Marmillion, founder and president of America's Wetland Foundation, is going to address exactly what you brought up, Gary, which is how do we get public funding involved, not government funding, but individuals and private enterprises involved in trying to help mitigate some of this land loss and relocation of individuals. I believe that's going to be part of his presentation next week. Dr. Twilley, I'd like to thank you for your presentation today, and I'm going to turn it over to Charles for any closing comments, and then we will conclude our Rotary Coastal meeting today.
Great, thank you very much.
I'll just tell you, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, anyone who is not tuned in to what's going on with this club really needs to get on board. What powerful, compelling, and speakers we've had, and it's just encouraging just to hear what you have to say. I know y'all, our speakers, think about this deeply and are throwing a lot of resources in it, so it's encouraging to have you involved. Just as a club, please, we need to ask all of you to continue to spread the word. Our meetings are open right now. We are going to charter this club shortly within the next 30 days or so. And of course, I thought it was interesting how distributed Sea Grant is, because I believe that is our vision. Perhaps we could just follow Sea Grant around the world, because we certainly are a coastal organization right now, but I think our scope and reach will be much broader than that over time. So anyway, those of us that have these networks connections, please invite them. The meetings are open at the moment, and we also want to increase our membership, people that are involved and participating. But that's about it. erotarycoastal.org if you'd care to enroll or apply, or if you have any questions. Philip, back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Charles. And with that, we'll conclude our meeting. And as Charles indicated, if you're interested in joining us, go to erotarycoastal.org, apply now, and we'd love to have you as a Rotarian as we serve our coastal communities. Thank you again, Dr. Twilley, and y'all have a great day.
Thanks,
Robert.
Thanks.